As asked in the title, what are the rules set by society that are meant to be broken in order to be happy? Edit 1. There is a difference between rules and laws. As Arnold Schwarzenegger said, we have so many rules in life about everything. Break the rules. It is impossible to be a true original if you're too well behaved and are not breaking the rules. You have to think outside the box. What is the point of being in this world if all you want is to be liked by everyone? The only way that I ever got any place was by breaking some of the rules. Edit 2. Firstly, thanks for all the awards. Please don't waste money on the award for me if possible and donate it to some charity instead. Secondly, the biggest lesson I learned: understand why the rule exists in the first place, and then understand why you are trying to break it. Some rules are there for you, some rules are there to bound you. Thirdly, one of the most underrated comments I found, courtesy of a Reddit user: in general, most rules make sense when you drill down enough. Not that I follow all rules strictly, but the older I get, the more I try to stick to the letter of the law. When I was younger, I tended to ignore rules that were inconvenient or seemed silly. However, that was ultimately just born from laziness and not because the rules actually shouldn't be followed. I will fudge a little when it comes to the speed limit and crossing the street, but I largely just accept that I'm being told not to do something for a good reason. The silly examples are really the best. I have gotten into fishing over the last few years, and when I started, I didn't always 100% follow the regulations on where and when I could fish certain rivers. Then I read into it more and realized my behavior could be endangering the sport I was coming to love. If I was tromping through a river off-season, it's likely I was destroying the areas where fish spawn, and if I was using the wrong kind of gear, I was risking harming fish in an area where their population was fragile, mostly due to fires and landslides, sometimes decades prior to me finding the place. I had a similar realization when visiting state and national parks last year. There are tons of signs all over the place telling you not to walk in certain places, and tons of people generally ignoring them. If you actually read the reasons for those rules, they exist for a good reason, including protecting indigenous sites, protecting biological soil crust, which can take decades to repair itself, not interfering with animal habitats, and in the case of the Painted Hills, protecting a beautiful view for future generations, which a ridiculous number of people feel comfortable tromping all over. Edit 3. Another new comment I found, courtesy of another Reddit user. Thanks for an interesting perspective. I always say, it's not the exact rule that ought to be followed, but the spirit of it. Unfortunately, for rules to mean anything, and for them to be enforced, they have to be codified. They have to be expressed in words. But this is really difficult because as soon as you describe a rule, you open it up to criticism and loopholes based on the verbiage used, and you invite endless arguments and adjustments to it. I am in the Navy. I live in an environment where alcohol usage is very restricted. At sea, we are issued 2 cans of beer a night, and that is all you are permitted to drink. Many choose to obey this rule to the letter. Many more obey it in the spirit of which it is intended, which is don't get drunk and be unfit for duties. So they will drink more without knocking themselves out. Of course, many more ignore the rules completely, but I'm not trying to talk about them. On a different note, many children are given bedtimes. A specific time has to be set in order for the child to settle into a routine and get plenty of sleep. Is it the end of the world if the child stays up half an hour later occasionally for whatever reason? Not really. That half an hour isn't going to make the difference the next day if it is still a reasonable time. The spirit of the rule allows the children to remain rested even though it is being broken. Not sure if this really answers the question, but I rarely get to tell people about this attitude of mine. Story 1. I was sent to military school as a child. The biggest lesson I learned was how to effectively break the rules. Learn the boundaries and break the rules as they suit the situation. But breaking the rules without knowing why they are in place or what benefits you intend to gain from not following them feels like more of a fool's errand. There is a lot of truth to the idea that prison just creates better criminals. I started out only breaking rules I didn't like. But when I realized that breaking rules without reason didn't achieve anything but wondering if I'd get caught, I changed my approach. Now I always try to understand why a rule is in place. If it's safety, got it, easier to risk assess there. If it's control, why is it there? Am I the one who should be controlled? Or is this for someone else? Following the rules stopped working for me once I realized that there are many reasons rules are put in place and not all those reasons are good or noble. Story 2. Breaking the rules just to break them isn't the goal. What you should achieve is a point when you realize why rules exist. Once you get there, it's easier to know which rules are important, which not so much, which ones are wrong, and which ones might be conditional. The real moment of Zen is knowing when breaking a rule is actually serving the purpose that the original rule was intended to. Story 3. Music. This sounds quite tame compared to other stories, but in my school music class, we were told to follow certain formulas to get a good grade. There was a composition aspect to our final exam, and we were told, in your composition, never write the seventh chord leading into the first chord, and similar things like that. Basically, music composition was supposed to hit certain criteria in order to get a good mark. My issue was, I was 18 and had been a music lover since birth. While I was no Mozart, I certainly knew that there was no such thing as musical limitations when it came to composition. I constantly asked why. Why can't I write this? Why can't I write that? It makes sense. This is a class where the teacher would say, there's no such thing as an E sharp, although in this one piece there's an E sharp, so forget about that. Anyway, for the purpose of a good grade, I followed those rules. Now I write music for fun, and I enjoy doing all the things I wasn't supposed to. I also wish to thank Daft Punk for their song Giorgio by Marauder. There's a monologue by Giorgio in the beginning of the song where he spoke about forcing himself to forget everything he learned about music. Melody, harmony, time, etc. Then he became truly free. Then he became truly great. Story 4. When Washington, D.C. decriminalized cannabis, you couldn't exactly sell it, so people sold $80 t-shirts and gave cannabis out as gifts. That's when I started realizing that we can navigate a lot differently than we do. I never took a peek underneath the main layer of society's obvious layer. I realized that I'm playing this game straight while the game is kind of rigged, and everyone else sees it and is adapting while I'm just accepting. No longer. Now, I read the rules and find the holes, since that's what people who are getting ahead seem to be doing. Story 5. I used to be the definition of safe when I was growing up. I didn't drink until just before I turned 18, which is legal in my country. I never smoked or tried drugs, studied hard in school, and so on. When I finished school, I realized I wasn't happy just following the rules aimlessly. I began to push boundaries, rebel against rules a bit, and basically just live my life to the fullest. I've made some poor decisions since then, but I believe it's part of growing up, to be honest. As long as you're careful not to get a criminal record, drop out or fail college, or do something stupid enough that has serious lifelong consequences, it's all part of blossoming into a mature, responsible adult. Story 6. Looking for internship, jobs, and promotions. Bear in mind that it concerns my experience in big companies. Startups were great. Human factor is way more important than competency as long as you have the basic requirements. All my internships and jobs were basically me knowing someone. While I have a pretty good resume, I saw people far more qualified than me getting rejected. It also happened to me. I wanted an internship at Johnson & Johnson Research and Development during my last degree. I was rejected while they took someone with no experience and not even half the qualifications I have. I learned later that the girl they recruited knew someone there, her father's friend. She ended up wasting their time, and they called me 3 months later. Obviously, I was already working somewhere else. The same with promotions. Ingratiating oneself seems more effective than anything. Working hard doesn't always pay. Sometimes it costs you. It's a cliché, but that's when I understood work smart, not hard. It's not just about your method. It's also about how you make your work, skills, and yourself valuable. If you work hard and are agreeable, you are never going to get a promotion. It's simply because you, at that job, are more profitable to them than promoting you and taking another person who might be less hardworking. For those who want to maximize profits, they will do their best to keep you in that place, and it's even worse if you are agreeable. They will limit your raises as much as they can, as well as be tougher on your schedule and work. After all, you are an important part that the workplace depends on for profits. So many Reddit malicious compliance and revenge stories are from people like these. Good people working hard but treated like a tool to be discarded by someone who seems disconnected from reality or grossly incompetent. The two reasons above are why. Unqualified individuals who know someone or reach their position by ingratiating themselves rather than competence. So, the best ways are networking and not working so hard, at least until you reach a level where you can easily get recognition for your hard work. Also, don't trust colleagues too much. A girl in my lab had inappropriate relations with the director multiple times and got away with stealing many scientific papers from my former professor, one of which I was co-author. Story 7. I realized it when I got out of the army and learned I can grow weed and mushrooms with relative ease and very little money. I made a lot more money than I did working overnight garden recovery for Home Depot. For me, the secret was keeping it to a manageable level of lights and only selling to one person who bought everything I had. I also never talked about it until a few years after I quit growing. All in all, most people thought I was a really successful woodworker. Now I'm a full-time woodworker and kind of successful. I guess the lesson here is to forget the law. They have some unnecessary rules. Story 8. Stop trying to accommodate everyone and their grandma. Somehow, society expects you to like and love everyone, no matter how they treat you. No. I like the people I want to like and be indifferent to people I don't like and don't want to have anything to do with them. My father used to say, if everyone likes you, you are probably neglecting your own needs. There will be people you'll never see eye to eye with, and that's a good thing. It's just proof that you have your own preferences and views. Story 9. Some of the answers are so edgy. Feels like reading a Joker demo reel. I made my own rules. You can bend the rules all you want once you understand why they are here to begin with, and even then, there is no obligation. And most of all, I can't stress enough how being that guy that plays by his own rules isn't a personality or at most a poor one. As asked in the title, what are the rules set by society that are meant to be broken in order to be happy? I don't know, tax evasion, cheating at poker, jaywalking, cooking minute rice in 40 seconds? What kind of answer did you expect? Story 10. Getting steamrolled in relationships and friendships by acting how I perceived was right, instead of how people actually responded positively to. It turns out I was being a gigantic, judgmental person and was projecting what I thought society's values to be on the people around me while not working on myself or my personality. Realizing this simultaneously destroyed and rebuilt my perception of reality, and continues to do so each day. Still a work in progress that I don't think will ever be finished, but I'm happy to get a shot at it. Story 11. The rule of thumb is that calling off work means you are considered unreliable. I called off this weekend after calculating that if I didn't pass my class, it would cost me approximately 666 hours of work to retake it. The company I am being unreliable towards had lied about a job and pay increase, and they put me in a position that led to my grade being uncertain. That rule can be disregarded. I broke it and probably will again. Story 12. Tripped on acid once and had the thought, nobody owns this planet, so why do you let other humans tell you what to do on it? Since then, I felt a lot more free. The one rule I live by now is hands to yourself unless otherwise consented. Growing up, I was way too caught up in trying to be a goody two-shoes. It took me getting into adulthood to ask myself, what am I trying to prove? And I started living life more how I wanted to. Story 13. My first job involved calculating how much money I would need for bills, etc., and determining how much time was required for work and chores like preparing dinner and doing the washing and cleaning. I concluded that I would spend my whole life working just to continue working, paying off bills, and never having any savings at the end of it. So I found an innocent way to bend the rules to earn more money by doing a side hustle in addition to my main job. This means I don't have to work as much and get more time for my own life. Martin Luther King said, "It's one's moral obligation to disobey unjust laws." Story 14. Even laws should be broken sometimes. I read about this third world country where it was illegal to, I kid you not, give water to people standing in line to vote. That's so ridiculously evil that I consider it anybody's duty to do it anyway. Story 15. When I felt empty and depressed in college, even though I was doing all right in my subjects and had some friends, I had heard it so many times over my lifetime that I internalized must go to college as a life rule. It hurt like hell, but I admitted to myself, in an intense bout of sadness, that this isn't for me. It just felt wrong. Lo and behold, 2 years and some terrible experiences later, I'm working toward being a tradesman with a decent paycheck for someone who started with no experience. Not once had anyone mentioned trades when I was thinking of what to do after high school. Story 16. Survive first, worry about the paperwork later. I started to really believe in that phrase when I got involved with law enforcement. It's true in many high-risk situations, for example, in aviation or the military. Story 17. In general, most rules make sense when you understand them enough. Not that I follow all rules strictly, but the older I get, the more I try to stick to the letter of the law. When I was younger, I tended to ignore rules that were inconvenient or seemed silly. However, that was ultimately just born from laziness and not because the rules actually shouldn't be followed. I will fudge a little when it comes to the speed limit and crossing the street, but I largely just accept that I'm being told not to do something for a good reason. The silly examples are really the best. I have gotten into fishing over the last few years, and when I started, I didn't always completely follow the regulations on where and when I could fish certain rivers. Then I read into it more and realized my behavior could be endangering the sport I was coming to love. If I was tromping through a river off-season, it is likely I was destroying the redds where fish spawn, and if I was using the wrong kind of gear, I was risking harming fish in an area where their population was fragile, mostly due to fires and landslides sometimes decades prior to me finding the place. I had a similar realization when visiting state and national parks last year. There are many signs all over the place telling you not to walk in certain places, and many people generally ignore them. If you actually read the reasons for those rules, they exist for a good reason, including protecting indigenous sites, protecting biological soil crust, which can take decades to repair itself, not interfering with animal habitats, and in the case of the Painted Hills, protecting a beautiful view for future generations, which a ridiculous number of people feel comfortable walking all over. Story 18. When I joined the army, I learned that you could do everything perfectly and follow every little rule. But if someone else doesn't, then you'll get punished along with them. It's better to be a little slick and enjoy life instead of stressing about everything. Story 19. I believe part of growing up should be breaking the rules and norms for which you were raised. If you don't challenge and disappoint your parents and society, you end up a version of your parents' ideal. This may not be a true expression of who you truly are. I only challenged those rules later in life as an adult. I was brought up by my mother, and I soon realized I was my mother's idea of a man. For example, I was too scared to grow a beard because only unkempt men grew beards. Again, my mother's idea of men. I did finally liberate myself by breaking from the norms I was brought up with. It has been one of the most liberating experiences of my life, having the courage to be me. Story 20. Over the years, it became increasingly obvious that the people signing the paychecks were not looking at how people were doing the job, just looking at the results and didn't care how people got the results. The only thing that seems to matter is the end result. How you got there doesn't seem to matter if it means maximum profit. Most of these people getting ahead were cutting corners, fluffing numbers, or just doing a poor job but getting things done as far as the paperwork could see. Just going to work every day and being forced to interact with peers has taught me that doing the right thing rarely seems to be the winning move. Story 21. When my lawyer told me not to call Child Protective Services, let me explain. My wife said in court that there was nothing wrong with our child, and I violated custody by bringing him to the doctor. I knew the truth that I and others had seen a number of health-related issues with our child that she was willfully ignoring. Child Protective Services got involved, and she magically had his pediatrician see him the same day Child Protective Services came, for the first time in 6 months. She told the pediatrician in their report that she gave him the antibiotics for the upper respiratory infection he had. The one she didn't mention in court at all when she said he was completely fine, because everyone knows that when someone is completely fine, they take antibiotics.